Hey up everybody, welcome back to the Ardu Cycling YouTube channel, where today I am very happy to say that I am talking about the Velogames Giro d'Italia, and this is probably one of the three most important videos that I will be making this year, of course the other two being the other two Grand Tours. So let's have a look through the riders and see who's going to do well, who might not do as well, and who's like pretty good value for money out of all of these riders. So we're going to start off with the most expensive rider, and that is Richard Carapaz. He is in the all-rounder category, and I think that's fairly understandable. If you remember back to last year, Egan Bernal was 24 points as well, and he ended up scoring the most points of any rider last year in the Giro d'Italia, so it makes sense that Carapaz also fulfills that category as well. I think that he is one of the favourites, and I expect him to be probably up there in GC, certainly a podium as possible as long as he doesn't get ill or has a crash. João Almeida, well, I think that he is also a good choice, but for perhaps shorter TTs, and there's only two of them instead of three, might not favour him as much. In previous editions he's been 12 points and 16 points, and he's scored well, and I think that there are fewer favourites here this year, and I think that will increase his chances of getting points. But I think that for 20 points he is quite a lot. I might be more likely to choose Carapaz, who has a stronger team, for example. And then you got a massive drop off from João Almeida down to Tom Dumoulin, who is 14 points. Unfortunately, Dumoulin hasn't looked too great this year, so I wouldn't be recommending you putting him on, although he could certainly surprise in the two-time trials and perhaps pick up a stage win or two there. You got Pello Bilbao, who's been on absolute flying form this year. He almost won the Tour of the Alps recently. He did really well at the Itzulia Basque Country, and he seems really fast in a reduced sprint at the moment, which could be very important for those fantasy points when it comes down to perhaps some kind of puncher finish or a sprint between GC guys. I think that Bilbao for 12 points is probably a very good choice, and he's probably better than Kelderman and Port, who are the other 12-point riders. Kelderman and Port, neither of whom have looked particularly great this year. I believe this is Port's last Grand Tour, so maybe he might want to go out with a bang. I think it's possible Port still finishes inside the top 10. Kelderman will likely also finish inside the top 10. But I think that Bilbao just has that slight kind of edge that will make him a better choice. 10-point riders, you've got Tobias Foss, who was very consistent last year, always picking up a couple of GC points, and of course the TTs. Of course he hasn't looked too great this year, but I do expect him to still finish inside the top 15 on GC probably. Sivakov also is kind of like Port. He'll likely be a domestique for Carapaz, so I'm not sure how much freedom he'll get. And then Valverde will likely be a good choice for stage 1, but I'm not sure what his intentions are for this race. I'm not sure if he's going for GC or stages. I think that more than likely your better option is to save 2 points and maybe go with one of the 8-point riders like Thymen Lensman, who's finished in the top 10 at the Tour of the Alps and also Tirreno Adriatico recently, both Italian races, so it clearly is pretty good racing in Italy. He's a good time trialist, and he finished third in that final TDT of the Vuelta last year, if you remember, so he's clearly a very strong rider and could very much finish inside the top 10. Then you've got these other four riders, Costa and Ulissi. I don't see too much coming from them. Maybe they could get a stage win apiece, but really I think they'll be working for Almeida. De La Cruz will be working for Miguel Angel Lopez. So therefore Van Zevenen could be another good choice because he'll have some freedom, considering that the Quick-Step Alpha Vinyl team doesn't have too many climbers in their roster. Moving on to the climbers, we've got Simon Yates as the most expensive one there. He's 22 points. I think that makes sense considering that he finished on the podium in this race last year. I think he is likely also one of the main favourites. Of course, he has looked a bit hot and cold recently. Sometimes he does really well, sometimes he just doesn't show up to races at all and he just has really bad legs. So he's quite kind of unpredictable in that sense. So bear that in mind when you're picking him. But I do also think that he is a very good choice, and I am very much contemplating putting him onto my team. Landa, I've been burnt by quite a few times. I had him on for the Vuelta and the Giro last year, and he did terribly in both of them. Although he did crash out Giro, which isn't like really his fault. But I think that Landa for 18, I wouldn't be recommending just because he doesn't really have the sprint to contest in any kind of reduced finish. He also doesn't have a very good TT. And so therefore his only opportunity of getting points is on mountaintop finishes, and you have riders further down who are cheaper in price who will do the same thing. Somebody like Lopez or Bardet fulfills that quite nicely, both of whom have looked really good at the Tour of the Alps recently, so I'll be favouring both of those over him, especially Bardet at 14 I think is a really good choice. That's quite cheap for a rider who is a potential podium candidate, in my opinion. Then you got some 12-point riders, Emmanuel Buchmann and Carthy. Again, inconsistent is probably the word that comes to mind. I haven't really seen too much of them recently. Of course, Carthy came top 10 in this race last year, so I would expect something similar to come from him this year. Buchmann I just haven't really seen enough of to warrant putting him onto my team. Ciccone, again, forming himself into a bit of a GC rider. He tried to do that last year and he was doing really well, but then I think he crashed into the final week and therefore he lost his top 10 position. So it's certainly possible that Ciccone could try to do something again. Jai Hindley is the third kind of spoke of the Tridente for Bora Hansgrohe, and I think that he's likely probably going to be the highest placed GC rider. Maybe also Keldman, but I think that Jai is also pretty good. He's finished on the podium in this race before. I think he's climbing pretty well and could certainly be a decent one. The other ones who in the 10-point brackets, like Nibali, Martin and Poles, I'd expect more to be going in the breakaway, although Martin does certainly fulfill the kind of criteria where, although he isn't very good at time trialling, that doesn't matter this year because there aren't a lot of TTKs, but he could finish inside the top 10. Poles might have some freedom to try and pick up his first ever Grand Tour stage win because he's never won one yet, so therefore I think that it's possible he could do that this year. When you get to the 8-point and down riders to like 6 points, you generally have a lot of riders to go into the breakaway, like riders like Chavez, Fortunato, Kemner is a really good one as well, who I really like, James Knox, Mollema, Pozzovivo, Sosa. All of these are riders who you might see going for the Maya Azuria and also going for like breakaway stage wins. I do like those riders who I've just mentioned there. And then you've also got the 6-point riders who I think that Cohn Bauman and Sam Oman could be decent riders, but considering that Foss and Dumoulin don't look quite on fire at the moment, they might be given a bit more freedom in that sense. You've also got Boitrago, he's a good one because he won the Saudi Tour earlier this year, climbing really well, the young Colombian. And then you've also got the Intermarché pairing of Jan Hirt and Lion Talame. You really have a lot of good choices here, you can't go too wrong. I think mainly what you're looking at in this department is to try and pick some breakaway riders perhaps, because usually you do end up with like 8 stages of the Giro ending up in breakaways, so I think that those could be some good choices for you to go with. In the sprinter category you do have quite a few sprint stages, and especially if you can pick a sprinter who can climb a bit more, that is going to be really beneficial because they'll contest a few more stages. Caleb Ewan has proven that he can climb quite well, as has Biniam Girmay. So I'd be expecting those to be slightly better choices than some of the other pure sprinters like Cavendish, Damar, Nizzolo and Gaviria, who perhaps don't climb quite as well. And then you also have some cheaper options if you need to save a couple of points here. So my best ones I think are Albanese, who's looking really good at the moment. Phil Bauhaus doesn't really have a lead out from Bahrain Victorious, but he is certainly one of the fastest sprinters here, and I'd certainly be expecting him to finish in the top 5 of sprints somewhat consistently in this race. You've also got perhaps Case Ball and Alberto Danesi. The only issue is you don't know who they're going to be sprinting for. Both of them are sprinters, so the safest option is really just to avoid them and pick somebody more certain like Bauhaus. And then you've also got Andrea van Dlam, who might be a bit more likely to get into the breakaway, a bit more of a puncher rider. Of course, he won a stage in the Giro d'Italia last year, so maybe he's trying to recreate something like that this year. In the unclassified riders category, well, you've got, of course, the most expensive unclassified rider there's ever been in Velogames, which is Mathieu van der Poel. He is the same price as he was in the Tour last year, where he got, I believe it was somewhere between 700 and 800 points he got in the Tour last year. So I do think that he could do something very similar this year, especially on stage 1, stage 2. He could certainly get the Maya Rosa fairly early on. So I think that Mathieu van der Poel is a really good choice if you can fit him onto your team, if the budget allows. 8-point riders, I'm not a huge fan of all of these, just because Magnus Cort Nielsen, I think a lot of people will think back to the Vuelta last year and say, oh, Magnus Cort Nielsen's going to do the same like he did at the Vuelta. Whereas that's not really like a like for like. He's been ill recently, and generally he gets better as the Grand Tour goes on and people start to fatigue. And in that sense, a lot of the stages towards the latter half of this race don't suit Maggie too much. His kind of area comes quite early on, so I'm not overly certain about how he's going to go. Alessandro Covi will more than likely be working for João Almeida. He hasn't looked brilliant recently, has Covi, so I'm not convinced about him being a great choice. But then again, he did come he did very well last year. I think he got a couple of top 3 finishes in some stages. And then Mauro Schmidt, of course, the winner of a stage last year. But 8 points might be just a little bit too much. I might be more tempted if he was 6, perhaps. And then you got a series of 6-point riders and 4-point riders who are quite good. I'm just going to pick out the ones who I think are the best and skip out the ones who I don't like too much. So you got Affini, who could do quite well in that stage 2 TT. You got Aliotti, who might be working more than likely as a domestique, but might have some freedom. He's a very young, talented Italian climber. You've got Lilian Calmejean, who will be going in the breakaways more than likely, as will Simon Carr. He's looked very good recently, looking very lean at the moment, so I think that he might have some freedom, especially if Carthy goes and doesn't do as well in GC. Simone Consonni has finished quite well in quite a few stages at the Giro in the past, but he might be leading out Davide Cimolai more likely, so I'm not sure about Consonni either. Dries de Bont did really well in this race last year. Thomas de Gent, can he re-find that breakaway form that he's had in the past? I'm not too sure, but he could certainly. Damien Howson would be the most dangerous rider that Bike Exchange really have in the hills if Simon Yates wasn't to start doing too well. Juan Pedro Lopez finished fairly high up in GC. I think he was top 20 in GC at the Vuelta last year, and he finished 11th in GC at Zulia Basque Country, so he could be an outside GC option as well. Nons Peters has won stages in the Tour and also in the Giro, so he's a good breakaway rider. Lorenzo Rota, this will be a home race for him, of course, the Italian, very versatile, kind of like a puncher, so I think that he's certainly one to watch out for. And then I've got 2 really good 6-point riders. The first one being Matthias Skelmos Jensen, who has done really well this year. If you remember Catalonia, he finished quite high up in that first stage. He did well at the Tour de la Provence this year. He could certainly finish top 15 on GC here. He's fairly punchy and he's got a good time trial, something that he's certainly one that I would highly recommend. And so is Attila Volter, who I really expect to be in perhaps the climber category here, but he is the GC rider for Groupama FDJ. He's Hungarian, it starts in Hungary. He's very motivated for this race. Attila Volter is by far the 6-point rider that I recommend you put on above all other 6-point riders. You've got some other great ones like Nathaniel Tesfatsion, the other Eritrean rider. You could have him and Binyam Girmay on your team and have a nice Eritrean pairing. That would be quite a cool team to have there. You got Jan Tranik, who does quite well in breakaways as well. He also does well in TTs, so he could be a good one, but will he have the freedom? Bahrain do have a lot of riders who need protecting in terms of like a GC aspiration here as well. 4-point riders that aren't too many that I like the look of. Really, I'm looking at riders still to get in the breakaway, so Lawson Craddock might be one. Felix Gall might not get in the breakaway, but he is on fire at the moment. He finished 6th place in GC at the Tour of the Alps, and his lowest placing in any stage was 11th place. He is the best 4-pointer that you can pick for your teams. Other than that, I'm looking at Matt Holmes, who is a climber for Lotto Soudal. He did well in the Giro a few years ago. You got Mahawi Kudus, the climber for EF Education Easy Post. You got Sylvain Monique, he's a climber as well for Lotto Soudal. Barnabas Payak, Hungarian rider, perhaps he'll be motivated with the depart of the race finish starting in his country. And then you got Harold Tejada, who is a good climber, who finished 20th in GC at the recent Tour of Romandy. So that is, as far as I can tell, all of the riders pretty much that you can choose, and hopefully that has been somewhat useful in helping you decide who you want to put onto your teams. So all that is left to do is put in the comments down below what you think. Are there any riders that I've missed that you think I should have called out there? Who are you thinking of going with? Who do you think is going to win? Just let me know all of your predictions in the comments down below. I will be going through and reading them all. And of course, if you're not subscribed already, then please do subscribe. This is the ultimate channel to subscribe to if you love Velogames content. All that is left to say is to keep safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!